I was listening to the news in Jackson, Mississippi, and they were using the N-word to describe thieves on the news. It was that common in white culture.
So these were the white news people reporting events with black people in them.
Yes.
And they were using the N-word instead of African Americans.
A nigger robbed the grocery store yesterday.
Wow. 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 This is on network.
On TV.
Welcome to Peter and Phil's Courageous Conversations, a podcast addressing race relations and social issues in hopes that you'll be inspired to do the same. Now, let's begin our conversation with your hosts, Dr. Peter Weinstein and Dr. Philip Nelson.
When you're in a conversation with a group of people, some of whom you know and some of whom you don't know, they don't always know your sense of humor like I do.
Right.
Do you find yourself sometimes thinking and then rethinking what you're going to say?
All the time.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the talk I give on perspective, I gave it to this corporate group. I went back and forth about a story I was going to tell in which a policeman actually used the N-word addressing my father. And I went back and forth of whether I was going to say the word or tell them he used the N-word. And when I first decided to use the story, I was going to say the word. When I got there, I felt uncomfortable because I didn't know these people and they didn't know me. And I was as concerned about the African Americans in the audience as I was anybody else.
Right.
I knew most of them would just be shocked, but I also knew that there would be some whites in the audience that would say, how come he can say it and I can't? How come he can say it in that manner as a part of a story and I can't, right? And at the same time, I was unsure how, it just so happened the African Americans in the audience were a lot younger than me, and I think they would have been fine. I decided not to because that wasn't the point of the story. And I didn't need the word to make the story any more impactful than it was. But to this day, I feel that I took the coward's way out because I think we've given it too much power. We had diffused the power even when it was being used every day. My culture had diffused it for us by the time I was born.
Right.
And when I was born, I was listening to the news in Jackson, Mississippi, and they were using the N-word to describe thieves on the news. It was that common in white culture.
So these were the white news people reporting events with black people in them.
Yes.
And they were using the N-word instead of African Americans.
A nigger robbed the grocery store yesterday.
Wow. 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 This is on network.
On TV. The guy who did it, I don't know his real name. All I know is that by 1962, 63, I think you can Google him. WJTV got so many complaints because at that point, Medgar Evers was alive, and at that point, we forced the TV station to remove him as anchor, but they didn't fire him. They made him the weatherman, and I knew him as Reddy Kilowatt.
Reddy Kilowatt? Reddy
Kilowatt, because the electrical company sponsored the weather.
Interesting. Huh. Wow.
He modified his language. He went from the N-word to Nigra. He couldn't get past Nigra. Finally, they had to take him off the news. And they made him a weatherman because he wouldn't have to say anything about race in the weather.
So, just because we've been going all over tangentially on different things, Uncle Tom.
Yeah.
Microaggression?
It depends on how you use it.
Right.
If you call me an Uncle Tom, yes, that's absolutely a microaggression.
Okay.
If you allude me to did you ever read the book Uncle Tom appeared in?
Uncle Tom's Cabin?
Uncle Tom's Cabin?
I have not, no.
Okay. So Uncle Tom was a house slave.
Okay.
The common vernacular at the time was he was the house nigger.
Okay.
And he upheld all of the plantation owners' rules.
Okay.
He
Yes.
defended them. He made sure that the field hands were controlled. And so anybody who defends a racist societal structure is considered an Uncle Tom.
So in reading Frederick Douglass's book and talking about some of the blacks that were kind of more the favorite of the plantation owners, they may have fit into that category.
Correct.
Okay.
You have to understand, it took courage or stupidity not to step off the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Okay. Or not to do it in a defiant manner.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Apparently, Emmett Till, when he went to Mississippi from Chicago, was someone who wasn't aware. He had been raised in a more relaxed environment in Chicago. And as a 13, 14-year-old, he wasn't cognizant of how violent a response he could get. He also didn't know the rules.
Right. Because the rules were different in Chicago.
That's right. So when he went down there, he was visiting his cousins for the first time. He had never been to Mississippi in his life. But he was a talker. He was a slick talker. And in the South, glib talk isn't accepted very well, black or white. Because if you sound like you're better than us, then you think you're better than us. And we got to get to know you before we going to let you be better than us. Until then, you're just a slick car salesman. That's kind of how he was taken at first. And they apparently were giving him a hard time. And he apparently was kind of boasting about girls and stuff. And they were putting him up to getting a date with a white woman in the store. And at one point, so the story goes, he whistled at the woman, not knowing that is talk about a dog whistle.
Yes.
He whistled at the woman and they scattered. Everybody left. The woman went and got a gun too, because now she was justified in shooting him if he hung around. That whistle was considered a threat to her because according to white mythology, every black man wants a white woman. And according to white mythology, every black man wants your white woman. And so Southern white mythology says that it is justified to shoot a black man if he threatens your white woman. But at the same time, the people who live there, they understood. They may not be the only ones who might suffer. Their whole family could get lynched. They have nowhere to go. If they had to sneak out of town. As a matter of fact, his cousin who was with him actually snuck back out of town to get back to Chicago.
So Emmett needed the Southern Operations Manual so he could have performed correctly.
And the uncle that brought him down, who promised to take care of him, when they came to his house at 2:00 in the morning, did hardly anything because two white guys came with a shotgun and a pistol and said, I want to see the boy from Chicago. And he toured them through his own house. Now today, I might get my shotgun and shoot back. And then in the history that they will tell, they shot me out of self-defense. Sounds familiar? To a Louisville apartment?
Yeah. Were those stories brought out? I know you've been watching or have watched 2 Emmett Till movies, shows recently. Why don't you share the names of those, if you can run them off the top of your head?
Let the World See is one of them.
Women of the Movement.
And Women of the Movement.
Yeah. Worth watching?
Definitely worth watching.
What happens in 2022 in Jackson, Mississippi, when a unknowing person from the North comes and whistles at a white woman from the South?
Not much. Again, you didn't have integration then. You had black and white bathrooms then.
Yeah.
You didn't have integrated schools. Although now in Jackson, the schools aren't very integrated. They're almost all black. They're 9% black now. But you also have a significant black population in the suburbs now. The suburban schools are integrated, but they're majority white. Integration is much more accepted now. A lot of those rules were designed to prevent mixing of the races. There was a hard line between the mixing of the races. And you could count on one hand the interracial couples you might see in the mall. That's a lot more common now. So the rules are equivocating based on race. Real insults, macroaggressions are punished. Microaggressions are not so much.
It's funny as you talk about walking together in the mall, and we talked about mixed marriages, and it just came to mind Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
Came to mind West Side Story.
This is a human condition.
Yes.
That's why we have to get past this false ideology of race. If we can do that, we can reduce some of the opportunities for discrimination. But we first must recognize our own personal defects. The fact that we need to promote ourselves a little. We need that in order to get through the hard times. That's a good thing to a point. You know, just as you need a secure home, but do you need a gated community?
Yeah, and is a gated community there to keep people out, or is it now just a status symbol?
It's not a status symbol. It's to keep people out.
Right.
I'm sorry. Well, let's put it this way. The people outside of the gate never see it as just a status symbol.
Yeah, I guess it depends on who's working the gate.
I don't care who's working the gate. And I'm not discussing those people who truly wanted a house that happened to be in a gated community.
We've been talking for a long time about doing a podcast on the N-word.
I know.
And we keep avoiding it.
We kind of did a little bit of it today.
Yeah, but I'll put it on the list.
I don't know. I think we've kind of done enough of it.
You think so?
Yeah, because you can get really twisted in that.
All I know is it makes me uncomfortable.
I know.
And I think that's why you wanted to have the talk, is to see how uncomfortable you could make me.
Yeah, yeah, let's do it. We can always cut it out if it doesn't work, but it's such a twisted psychology. I mean, we have yielded so much power to this word,
right,
that navigating through it. So let me put it this way. And I know we've spent, we're close to the end of our time, but I was talking to a Black staff person who was really upset that her father wouldn't get the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I just don't know what to do. And I was telling her how important this was. And then I said, well, what does he say when you ask him why he won't do it? And she said, he doesn't trust the government. He brings up the Tuskegee experiment. And that was a long time ago. And I just looked at her, and I'm gonna bring up another word again. And I realized she didn't understand his perspective. So I had to explain it to her. And I think I'm gonna explain it to you because I saw your reaction when she said it. And you were like, what? But when I hear the Tuskegee experiment from my child's generation,
right,
I'm like you, I dismiss it. They're just being political. They don't really know what, I bet you they don't really know who the nurse's name is that convinced all of those patients to be treated, right? But I want you to imagine that you lived in a small town of 20,000 people, that you knew the doctors and nurses, not just in the hospital. They were part of your community.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to imagine being a member of a lot of communities like that, and then learning of the Tuskegee experiment, learning how the nurses convinced the patients who were suffering from syphilis to participate in this research project because their doctors asked them to do it. And the nurses knew what they were doing. The nurses knew they weren't going to get any better. You know, this wasn't a blinded study. The nurses knew that these men were being sacrificed for knowledge's sake. They also knew there was another group that was being treated, but this group was destined to die. And the nurse took care of them until they died. She loved them. She thought that she was convinced this was for the greater good. Now, I'm not questioning her decision. That's not the point of this story. The point of this story is, now imagine being a Black man and realizing that the government convinced the nurse to fool you, that I can't trust my Black doctors or my Black nurses. And imagine carrying that fear or distrust throughout your life. And imagine that fear or distrust being substantiated day in and day out with data discussing that validates the inequality of medical care between the false ideology of racists. That's a totally different milieu to take a brand new vaccine on out of. I don't know if I'm more afraid of the government or the virus.
Yeah, again, perspective.
Perspective. And when I explained that, she understood. She said, oh, good. She said, well, in that case, I need to go back and talk to him about that. And I said, no, see, that's your problem. No, you need to get him to talk to his doctor. And you need to explain to his doctor why he is so reticent. And if anybody's going to convince him, it's going to be his doctor, not you.
Therein lies the word trust.
Yes.
Which underlies a lot of our conversation and a lot of the issues, because there has been so much, I want to say distrust, but loss of trust in many ways as a result of much of our history.
Well, there's been so many permutations that affect trust.
Right.
History is nothing but his story, and his story is the story of the conqueror, not the victim. Except for in the case where the victim is still in power. When Southern states lost the Civil War, they still kept their power and their superiority. Once they killed Lincoln, and once Johnson became president, Reconstruction ended, and the South went back to what they were doing, but they just couldn't have slaves anymore. Well, they couldn't have open slavery. So they created euphemistic conditions that resulted in the same thing. And then they retold their story. In the South, across the South, they banned books that told the true history. Any book that put more than 3 paragraphs on the Civil War was banned. And any book that did not promote state rights as the reason for the Civil War was banned.
Again, a lot of the discomfort is a lack of trust that we all have.
Yeah.
That we all have. Well, I think we have solved all the world's problems in today's time. Again, yeah.
It's amazing how these problems keep cropping up every week.
Yeah. We didn't even cover half the stuff that I had made notes on. So, but it's good to catch up, and it just gives us more to talk about next time. So
I think you said it all at first, but I do want to recognize that Nationwide has supported us because of the impact that they would like for us to have on these type of issues. And for that, I acknowledge them on behalf of Dr. Weinstein and myself. We appreciate the fact that Nationwide had the courage as well as the willingness to help us deliver the message.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.